They got the Seahorse wrong. The House Velaryon sigil in House of the Dragon. Sigil is a seahorse. They got the Seahorse wrong. What the hell? Since 1999, since before the third book came out, George R. R. Martin has specified, since over 20 years ago, that the Velaryon sigil is the regular animal, that their seahorse sigil is of a real-life seahorse. Instead, House of the Dragon is using a fantastical heraldic-style one with an actual land horse on the top and a seahorse on the bottom. A horse with hooves and stuff and a fish's tail like a centaur. This is a sin against nature. Martin stated for over 20 years. It is prominent in fan-run websites and databases. You could take 2 minutes to Google this. It looks like a real-life seahorse. So that's why you've seen some on Twitter recently, such as the major book fan site Westeros.org and myself, tweeting out the hashtag #FixTheSeahorse. It's wrong. And if it sounds absurd to want them to change a heraldry mistake, that has already happened before. With the Targaryen heraldry itself, they screwed it up in Season 1 and had to fix it. Way back during production on Season 1, they gave Westeros.org's Elio Garcia a tour of the sets in Belfast, and he noticed that they got the Targaryen heraldry wrong. The official specific heraldry design they were using in the TV show. He pointed out it has a 4-legged dragon on it, 4 legs and 2 wings. Dragons don't look like that, and the sigil doesn't look like that either. Yeah, it's a 3-headed dragon, but they describe it pretty clearly in the books. And live dragons show up at the end of Season 1. That Martin wanted it to be a little more realistic, that in real-life heraldry and a lot of fantasy stuff, dragons have 4 legs and 2 wings coming out of their back. And he said that could never fly. And yeah, even the dragons as they ultimately have aren't too realistic, but they're more realistic than that. So dragons in the world of Westeros are shaped like a bat, that they have 2 hind legs and their 2 forelimbs are also wings, bat-shaped. And they must have mixed this up because in heraldry they usually use 4-legged dragons, and ones with 2 legs are called wyverns or something, like in the Welsh flag that they have 4-legged dragons. But however the mistake happened, he pointed out, you're using 4-legged dragons, that's really incorrect, and people will notice, because it's a very prominent sigil of one of the major factions. And he succeeded in getting them to admit the error and fix it. Or at least that's the official story. The problem is that HBO was pretty sloppy about this fix. They somehow found a way to make an even worse third option. That they could have ignored the complaint and said, we just like our version better. They could have fixed it consistently. Instead, they admitted their mistake and then were just plain sloppy about correcting it. So every other time, maybe every third time you saw a Targaryen sigil, it had the incorrect 4-legged version on it. What I think happened was they'd already made Viserys' costume and it was too expensive to recreate. Or they could have just blacked it out. But instead, that's what Viserys' costume looks like, and then they just fixed it in banners later on, and in their official websites and stuff. And they didn't these are people who didn't know how to coordinate with any of their units on a wider scale. These are people who boast, oh, haha, we don't know how to coordinate with the costume department. So this is a symptom of a wider problem. Usually this happened with CGI more than with real-life banners, that when you'd see Daenerys in like Season 4 with banners and stuff, they usually got it right then. But from Season 1 through Season 8, they just didn't listen. And they would interchange, sometimes within the same episode, between a two-legged dragon and a four-legged dragon. Like I said, it was usually the CGI, so I think it was a matter of they didn't tell the CGI departments when they subcontracted out, and not knowing better, they'd look at Viserys' dragon in season 1, and then the mistake compounded on itself, that the new CGI people in season 7 would look at a CGI mistake in season 4 and go, well, the people in season 4 used 4 legs, I guess maybe I should. So it built upon itself like that. That even for that big speech in the ashes that they have Daenerys give in the series finale, literally the series finale, it's a 4-legged dragon. And, or her fleets as she's sailing south and Rhaegal gets killed, or when she's sailing to Westeros at the end of season 6, usually CGI things. And they admitted it was a mistake. Their website and their official merchandise did manage to stick to 2-legged dragons. I am right now looking at my mouse pad, which is a Targaryen mouse pad piece of merchandise with a 2-legged dragon on it. But they weren't consistent about it. I'm angry, but it's triggering because this is how the old HBO screwed us over. That House of the Dragon isn't Benioff and Weiss. I mean, objectively, they have an entirely new set of executives, both in the show and at HBO. AT&T bought them out and replaced a lot of people. But this is starting out on the wrong foot when you get a well-known piece of heraldry wrong. So, yes, we want them to do the right thing by the fandom, which is hesitant to trust them at this point, by getting them to fix the Seahorse. It's a real goddamn seahorse, not a horse's head. This is like slapping an eagle's head on the body of a character named the Minotaur. Or like putting a fish's head on the horse sigil of House Bracken. It's nonsense. It's gibberish. This sigil controversy, the change to House Velaryon's sigil, without hyperbole, has book fans more upset than casting black actors to play the Velaryons. In total seriousness. Because you can sort of build arguments for race swapping in an adaptation change. Well, it's more of a condensation. Like with Salladhor Saan the pirate. They cut out a lot of pirate characters, and then they said, well, people from the Free Cities can be black, and the one pirate we put in as sort of a condensation character be black. Well, yeah, I guess, because he's a condensation, and it doesn't really violate the internal rules of the storyverse. And for the Velaryons, you've seen us making videos about this, debating it. Well, they sort of imply in the books that the lower-ranking Valyrians weren't as strict about blood purity as the Dragon Lords themselves. It varies it up more. Multiple reasons, both in-universe and out-of-universe, that you can debate whether you should do that and how you should do that, and across a spectrum of views. With race-swapping the Velaryons like that. Made an hour-long video about that. My opening words are just not some measured, well, like race swap, you have to think about this. 1 sentence soundbite, beginning of my video. They screwed up the Velaryon sigil. Changing the Velaryons to be black, there's arguments back and forth. Changing the sigil has us more angry because, I'm looking for words for this, because it's more cut and dry. Yes or no. It's a binary choice. There's no room for discussion. What ambiguity is there? Quote from the author, it's a real seahorse. Not one with a horse's head. Case closed. And on top of that, whereas you can see there's arguments towards, we kind of want a more diverse cast, and there's reasons it could fit in the universe. Changing a seahorse to an unrealistic horse's head on a fish's body animal, what reason do you have? What agenda could that possibly serve other than we didn't know any better? Other than that we kind of forgot it's supposed to be a real-life seahorse. Say what you will of the change to make the Velaryons black. I'm certain that HBO was well aware of it, that it was a change. Are they aware that changing the Seahorse sigil is a change at all? Or did they just kind of forget that it's laziness? No, I'm letting my biases from the Benioff and Weiss era come in here. I'm hoping that these new people were self-aware of the change, and that's the crux of this. Let me be clear. The central reason I'm angry is, was this an intentional change or was it just a mistake? Because the first time there was a mistake with the Targaryen four-legged dragon, as a sign of things to come, they openly admitted, oh, we kind of forgot. That they just weren't paying close enough attention to not just the book, but active fan sites which had fan art and sketches of the sigils at the time. They just had a mix-up and weren't aware it was a two-legged dragon. And they admitted, we just assumed, made a mistake. It wasn't a controversial decision, they just screwed up. It's not, oh, you made this controversial decision I disagree with. They just weren't paying attention. So that already happened, but maybe I'm letting my anger over the Targaryen four-legged dragon thing overlap into this unfairly. That I am terrified that someone, if we ask about this, they'll have a confused look on their face. It's not that I don't like their answer. I love this phrase. It's not that I don't like your answer. It's I'm scared that you don't even understand the question. That if I was at a live panel and I said, I'd like to talk about the Velaryon Seahorse, and Ryan Condal cut me off mid-sentence and said, I am aware we changed it from a regular Seahorse to a heraldic one, but these are the reasons I felt we should change it, I would feel okay, versus with Benioff and Weiss, you increasingly realize that they just weren't paying attention and were unaware when they made screw-ups like that. Because it's not a screw-up if they did it on purpose, it's a change I dislike. But that's a separate issue. So again, we're paranoid. All the book fans are so angry about this, more than the Black Velaryons. This is the real... I'm not exaggerating. I consider this the real controversy with House Velaryon. Fix the goddamn Seahorse. Because there's no argument or ambiguity. Was there an agenda you were pursuing by changing it, other than with Black Velaryons, that's a change they made on purpose to show diversity in their society, which probably may have existed in the books, but versus why were you paying attention? It looks like a sloppy mistake. But if gotta come down now. If it was a conscious change as part of the adaptation process to a visual medium, I understand that. That if my assumption is they thought it stood out more, or was in the heat of battle where you got battle flags running around. You know, on TV, you only see flags in the background for like a fraction of a second sometimes. If they said, we thought it had a more distinct, easily recognizable visual profile, I would go, okay, I disagree, but I don't think you're a bad person, and I'm not going to disown the show over this. That this isn't exactly like how it's described. And yeah, some of the heraldry in the books looked too similar to each other some of the time. And you went, yeah, this might not stand out well. We are reasonable fans. We are not toxic fandom. We are reasonable fans who understand that changes will be made in any adaptation process. We're filled with righteous fury because, for years, Benioff and Weiss took advantage of that trust. I say this as one of the people who was supporting them in the early seasons, and I got played for a fool, because how was I supposed to know that, well, HBO is propping up the boss's friend's son when he's really... he was hired through nepotism, he's a frat boy, and he doesn't know what he's doing. Stuff they later admitted to with a chuckle in later seasons, I was horrified by. That when little things were happening, little changes in the early seasons, I made the excuse, well, it's an adaptation process, and gradually realized that wasn't an intentional change. They just weren't paying attention when they started contradicting even themselves within the later seasons. Like Gendry Rivers, when for years you said the bastard name for it's either it's storm or waters, not rivers. Basic mistakes like that where this is just a screw up. You are a screw up. You're a fraud. They took advantage of our trust, and I feel so humiliated that in the early seasons I was actually making excuses for it. And my advice to book fans, who are the really strict ones, know when to pull your punches. Don't be the boy who cried wolf, because if you complain when, like Syrio Forel is actually bald in the books. If you complain, Syrio should be bald, why did you cast someone with hair? And you yell about that, if you always go up to level 10, you always dial it up to 11 when you yell about anything without a proportionate, appropriate response. If you yell about anything like, oh, that character should be bald, people won't listen to you when you're complaining, dear God, they threw out Sansa's storyline and replaced it with a rape subplot. Or, dear God, what the hell are you doing to TV Dorn? Major news sites tuned out the book fan sites because they were complaining about little changes as if it was blasphemy in the early seasons. And I know it starts small. Yeah, the heraldry change is probably a small thing. But from the other side, I'm trying to establish early with this new set of people, do you want us to trust you or not? That you are paying attention, even when you change things, it was a conscious choice. Because with Benioff and Weiss, year after year, they kept diverging from the books more and more. The fanatics kept gaslighting us. Even Zai, as a book fan, was even starting to get worried. That's what gaslighting is. They keep saying, you need to be more tolerant. You are toxic fandom. Adaptations need to change some things. And there's this surreal thing where by, season 6, all the stuff they did to, Dorne and Sansa, where this has nothing to do with the adaptation process, this is bizarre, and they go, focus on the good. You need to be more tolerant. This is an adaptation. And then by season 7, you had dragons and ravens suddenly able to zip across a continent in a few hours. And if someone has to resort to the thought-terminating cliche, well, the books are the books and the show is the show, that means they've lost. That means they have no counterargument. It's another way of saying, how dare you judge me? We'd ask, dear God, why did you throw out Sansa's storyline and throw her in an unrelated rape subplot? And the response by the showrunners themselves was to avoid public interviews for a full year and cancel their Comic-Con appearance. I will never forget that. No matter how much you hope I will forget that. That was the response. So no, the books are never the books and the show is the show in any adaptation, because that's what an adaptation means. There is always source material. You can't escape that. That doesn't mean it will always be like the source material. It could even be radically different and still be very good in the case of some comic book adaptations. But the fact of the matter is, you will never escape that comparison for any adaptation. The fact that it is an adaptation means it will be compared on some level to the source material no matter what you do, for good or ill. You can bend things, but you can't break them. And they broke Game of Thrones. In the early seasons, we trusted them, made excuses for them in the early seasons when they weren't answering our questions about changes. And we gave them the benefit of the doubt, because we are the better men and we're polite about it. They took advantage of our tolerance for years. And in the process, they took away our dignity. They made a mockery of our values and principles. Because I believe in giving leeway to an adaptation to make changes. And they utterly took advantage of our tolerance to the point they reduced it to absurdities. That we were fools to trust them and to be that tolerant. So I actually don't have as much of a problem with this change from an entirely new set of writers. If it was a conscious choice as part of the adaptation process, I am not ridiculously strict about an adaptation. When I say fix the Seahorse, at least, I mean, If this was a mistake, please change it. Or can you at least in a blog post or something explain why you intentionally changed it? I consider that also a fix. Address the Seahorse would probably be a better thing, though not as catchy. Because not telling us anything feels like the silent treatment that the Benioff and Weiss regime gave to us. Of course, and in this I am once again being the better man for good or ill, you think I'd learn. Of course, most of this sigil stuff we know from spy photos. And we're asking them to officially respond to stuff we technically shouldn't have access to. Except for the fact that it did come out with the Corlys Velaryon first official profile pic, though I will point out, the official profile pic they gave out for Corlys, I don't think it's an accident that his hair is draped over the top of the Seahorse, so people who weren't looking at spy photos wouldn't immediately realize that they have changed the Velaryon heraldry. You know, we know, because the spy photos are everywhere. So on the one hand, I'm really annoyed about this, but, like, realistically, I have to say, our hope is, if the first set of behind-the-scenes photos they make for Season 1 on this directly address the heraldry designs, and at some point, for one sentence, someone acknowledges in the first set of behind-the-scenes videos, oh yeah, we changed the Velaryon sigil on purpose to be a heraldic seahorse, the fantastical kind with a horse on the top, because we wanted it to be easier to recognize at a quick glance on the battlefield or on a ship, and it's a more distinctive profile. That's fine. That's all I'm asking for. Basic dignity. Not, oh dear God, we changed something as big as throwing out Sansa's storyline to have her raped, and guess what? We don't have to give public interviews anymore. At Comic-Con or anything. And just deflecting whenever we ask about that. Well, once we made the decision to do that, what choice did we have but to follow through on it? It's cynical deflection like that, versus a very basic, oh, why did you redesign the Velaryon sigil like that? And an honest response that this was an active decision without giving us the runaround. Dignity is what we are asking for, and it's a new set of writers. So, and maybe when the blog posts start coming out for this, just as Game of Thrones Season 1 had a wave of behind-the-scenes production videos in the lead-up to Season 1 explaining, these are the sets we're building, here's a video about heraldry, they had a video about heraldry back in the day. Hopefully they'll have something about this. I'll be discouraged if they don't. At least mention it once. And on top of that, this wouldn't be the first time that they have intentionally changed heraldry designs from the books, and these were active changes which I tolerated or agreed with, because they were common sense or done on purpose. Unlike the four-legged Targaryen dragon, they simply wanted it to be more visually distinctive, or in real life these colors are actually hard to distinguish. So let me run through this quickly. Most heraldry designs for Game of Thrones were made in one big burst in the lead up to Season 1 by a famous graphic artist, Jim Staines. He worked on the Ridley Scott movie, Children of Men. He's done a lot of medieval heraldry stuff, and he did a lot of research to get very specific designs rooted in medieval stuff. And he explained what was a combination of what the book said, real-life heraldry, and we wanted them to be visually distinctive. And you want to recognize them, I get that. So we had House Bolton heraldry in Season 1, even though they didn't show up until Season 2 with Roose, but they knew they'd need it. So they'd have Bolton heraldry, Florent heraldry at a tournament in Season 1, and that's fine. Some of them they changed to be more visually distinctive. In case in point, the Bolton heraldry. In the books, House Bolton's heraldry is a red-flayed man on a pink field, because it's supposed to look like, flayed flesh. And they said red on pink is hard to visually distinguish. Let's make it red on black. Okay, I fully agree with that. It's hard to see in real life. In a book, you can say that. House Frey in the books is actually a blue castle on a gray field, which does kind of look weird in real life. So the TV show changed that, so it's a castle. It's a stone gray castle against a dark gray sky over what's not just blue, but clearly blue rippling water, because it's supposed to show it's a river crossing. I'm mildly annoyed that it essentially reverses the colors, and reversing the colors has meaning in this universe. If you use reversed colors, you're a bastard. Bastards tend to reverse the heraldry of their house's color. So back in season 1, where they were trying to sell House Targaryen t-shirts with a black dragon against a red t-shirt, and no one was buying them in the HBO store. And I pointed out to the manager, because I live in New York, I went to the Bryant Park store, and I said, this is Blackfire heraldry. And they said, you are far from the first person to point that out to us. That no one was buying them, because they didn't realize if you flip the heraldry colors, that's bastard colors. But still, I get the argument that a gray castle on blue river makes more sense than a blue castle on gray, so I can see why they did it, or cleaned it up. Another thing is House Red Wine. We only started seeing that in season 4, because Olenna is a red wine. Olenna Tyrell was born a red wine. In the books, the red wine sigil is purple grapevines on a blue field. And yeah, like red on pink, that's actually really hard to see, so they made it purple grapevines against white, just to make it easier to see. One of the bigger changes was actually House Stark itself. That in the books, it's repeatedly described as a whole direwolf, this whole four-legged animal, more than just the head. But in the TV show, they actually have shown both versions, like on a banner on a wall, but the default version, that if you'd recognize, oh, this is the Stark sigil, it's a direwolf's head. In the books, that's actually Robb Stark's personal sigil, that they say instead of using a whole direwolf, Robb uses a direwolf head, which some have pointed out may have been a foreshadowing of the Red Wedding, that his personal sigil is a direwolf head. I'm not sure, but other times, like once or twice, you see people, like in jewelry and stuff, among the Lannisters, they have like a lion's head as opposed to a whole lion's body. So that's not quite a change so much as they prefer one variant over another. Sometimes heraldry uses an animal's head versus the whole thing, or like a stag's head versus a whole stag. That varies it up a bit. I can see why they did that without antlers or anything, at a glance, they wanted it to be really visually distinct, that this is a wolf's head and not like another quadruped like a bear or even a lion. At distance and blurry, they just worked around what makes this look like a distinctive profile to make it different from all the other ones. I actually think that the heraldry they changed the most from book to TV series was House Arryn, which is also in season 1. See, the Arryn sigil in the books is actually a sky blue falcon in front of a full white moon. It's completely within the circle of that moon, which is itself set on a sky blue field. The TV show version is a white falcon, not a blue one, next to a white crescent moon. So it's in front of the moon, it's in part of the part that isn't shining. So it's a white falcon next to a white crescent moon, both of them set on a dark blue field. Not sure why they did that. My only thought is maybe they thought it was easier to visually distinguish that this is a moon and not just a circle. That's probably why, when you think, maybe that's just a circle. No, it's a crescent, it's a moon. I think that's why they did it, to make it more visually distinguishable about what it is. It reverses the colors on the eagle, but not on the moon, of course. Not quite like the Frey one. That one's pretty different, but even then, you can see arguments for that, of, well, how would people know it's a moon and not a circle? The point being, even with the Starks using a head more than the regular direwolf body, or the Arryns, well, we wanted it to be clear it's a moon, so we made it a crescent. These were conscious choices. It wasn't a mistake. Compare this to when they just plain accidentally used four-legged dragons in the Targaryen sigil, and someone had to point out it was a mistake. So yes, I want someone to at least acknowledge that the changed Velaryon sigil isn't a mistake, but that they did it on purpose. That it wasn't just a sloppy accident. Because this is pretty important heraldry. To be honest, in terms of houses that play major roles in most prequels, the only ones we did not get on screen in Game of Thrones already in live action were the sigils for House Velaryon and House Hightower. The two big prominent families in the first prequel they're making. This was the heraldry we needed the most, and they never appeared in Game of Thrones in live action. We'd see them briefly in cartoons and stuff. I mean, other things like the Blackfire heraldry is just the Targaryen heraldry with reversed colors, so we didn't need to invent that. It's just a color shift. But I mean, a specific design of a specific animal or a heraldry piece. What are other houses we'd even need heraldry for in different eras? The big families that haven't appeared on screen yet were the Velaryons and the Hightowers. The ones we need most for this. That they would have them in the animated histories and lore videos, like the one they made about the Dance of the Dragons actually showed a Velaryon sigil at one point in a stylized form it was reading a manuscript that had Rhaenyra sitting on it, and it showed a regular Seahorse. So, I mean, they're not full canon because it's not in live action, but it's something to base it on. So more artistic people than me, for wiki purposes, on Game of Thrones wiki, when you need to make navigation menus and stuff displaying a character's sigil, for navigation purposes, we made mock-ups of the ones in the cartoons, and functionally use that as, okay, this is the Velaryon sigil, this is the Hightower sigil. They might not be the same in the TV show. We haven't seen the Hightower one yet. When we just got the first official photo of Alicent and Otto, they didn't have a Hightower sigil on their clothing. We'll see what they're doing with that, but the two big houses beyond the ones that already have known heraldry designs for House of the Dragon will be Velaryon and Hightower. And we had it all over our wikis. They ignored it anyway and came up with a new design with a horse's head. And why am I so worked up about this, apart from that the Velaryons on their own are prominent? It's not just the Velaryons. The Velaryon sigil is used as a basis for the heraldry of Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra's entire faction. Rhaenyra's personal sigil, which is used as the heraldry of her faction in the Civil War. They use it as her war banner. Her heraldry on her side is the regular Targaryen red dragon, quartered with the Arryn sigil and the Velaryon sigil. So it's not just the Velaryons. This affects one of the two halves in this civil war. One of the two sides, part of their flag has the Velaryon sigil in it. So when you see like merchandise, like banners, like mouse pads, all sorts of stuff, stickers, this affects the logo of one of the two main factions in the story, having the Velaryon sigil be a horse's head instead of a regular seahorse. I do kind of wonder, though, what other heraldry, after the Velaryons and Hightowers, what other heraldry might we see introduced for the first time in live action in this new prequel, House of the Dragon? The Velaryons and Hightowers are the two big ones, but after that, what else might we see? Please share your thoughts about this in the comments. I'm interested in what everyone is really looking forward to. What should we see or expect to see based on which characters are important, and which ones would you like to see in it? Third-tier characters, or even just as, like, a non-speaking cameo in a crowd scene, like in a military formation, or in a war council, or at a tournament or something. What's other heraldry we never saw before that you would like to see in this? Top of the list of things we will probably see is House Strong of Harrenhal. They're probably the next important in terms of character groups after the Velaryons and Hightowers. But House Strong's sigil is just basic geometric shapes. It's 3 vertical stripes, red, green, and blue, on a white field, for the colors of the forks of the Trident River. And we can already make fan art of that. We can make fan art of basic geometric shapes. It's not that specific of a heraldry design, so I'm pretty sure we're going to see the strong heraldry. It's just not very exciting heraldry. After House Strong, though, you see I'm saying I'm not sure if all these characters will be included. House Celtigar of Claw Island would be nice. That there are these other Valyrian vassal houses that followed the Targaryens to Westeros. They don't have dragons, and they're just on a different island in Blackwater Bay. I don't know if they'd even be a speaking role. They were in Fire and Blood, the Master of Coin under Rhaenyra was, but I'd like to see that as just a cameo in a crowd shot, even non-speaking. Just when Rhaenyra calls her banners, have a dozen lords, one of them is holding a Celtigar banner or something. House Celtigar's heraldry is red crabs on a white field, because they're from Claw Island, there's a lot of crabs there. After House Celtigar, I'd like to see a better version of the Manderley heraldry, that we briefly saw House Manderley of White Harbor's heraldry in Game of Thrones. For such an important house, they totally sidelined them in Game of Thrones, because they went, no, people like Lyanna Mormont, give Lord Manderley's speech to her. So, like, we only saw the merman sigil they have as a brooch, as jewelry. We never saw it as a banner, even like in Season 1, when they were planning ahead and had, like, Bolton heraldry, despite the fact there were no speaking Bolton roles yet, that they'd have a Bolton flag in the background of Robb's war camp. They didn't have a Manderley one, which is odd because they're one of the top 1 or 2 most powerful vassals in the north. It's like them and the Boltons and maybe the Umbers, because they control their only city. So I'd like to see better Manderley heraldry, because the Manderleys are some of the bigger supporters with the Starks of Rhaenyra, that there's actual named Manderley characters that come south to help fight with the Riverlanders. So I'd like to see one of them with some heraldry on that, like Torrin Manderley. After that, I'm not really sure. So the characters who would appear are people in crowd shots. House Strong, House Celtigar, House Manderley, a better Manderley one. Oh, what will be fun is seeing a real-life, large-scale war banner, like carried by someone on a horse. A war banner for House Reign of Castamere. That'll be fun. Because they're still alive at this point. That it's 100 years, 150 years before Tywin killed them all. And they did introduce the House Reign heraldry in animation since Season 1. They've used them in the Histories and Lore, so they've been in Histories and Lore stuff from Season 1 through Season 8. And we have a pretty clear design. They display it very prominently in animation of this is what the House Reign sigil looks like. But I still like to see it in live action. You know, not everyone watches the animated stuff. It's best when it's live. And when you see the war in the Riverlands actually have a House Reign character as like one of the lieutenants of the Lannisters leading their army to the battle by the lakeshore in the Riverlands. That just for all the mainstream audiences don't really follow. So, oh yeah, the Reigns would be alive at this point. And I'm just, for background stuff, I'm thinking in terms of merchandise, that if you actually go to like a comic book store and stuff, you can get a banner or a mouse pad for things as relatively second tier as House Tarth or Littlefinger's heraldry. You can get merchandise with that. So this wouldn't even need to be something that big. I mean, just if the Lannister lieutenant in his camp has House Reign heraldry prominently on his tunic, I think it'd be fun if they'll use that as a basis to make like mouse pads with the Reign sigil on it. Just thinking on that, but what background heraldry would you like to see? If you know this from fandom, we've been online with this for a while, background sigils from the books that haven't appeared before. In terms of who would appear, I mean, I don't think we'll see that much of the Iron Islands other than the Greyjoys themselves, but most of the war happens in the Riverlands and the Reach. So think about that mostly Riverlands and Reach houses. And again, no one that big. They've already introduced heraldry for House Blackwood and House Bracken. We've seen that. Check before you respond to that. A lot of this they did have just in the background in Game of Thrones. I'll put a link in the description to the heraldry page we have on Game of Thrones Wiki, so check if we don't have it yet. But background cameos from stuff that didn't appear before. I mean, all the major ones, like they're not going to introduce someone on the scale of the Lannisters or the Umbers or even the Blackwoods. Even if the Blackwoods have a speaking role, which they should in this, we already have their heraldry. I'm talking like minor background stuff that'd be fun to see, like the Celtigars or House Vance, House Piper, or House Darry. We never got heraldry for those Riverlands houses. Well, please tell me what you think in the comments below. It's an interesting discussion. Which new heraldry, which hasn't appeared with its own live-action design before, do you think we should see based on the narrative of Fire and Blood? What will we see? Because they're probably going to cut a few minor characters. But, rank it by, this is the one that they'd be silly if they didn't include that. These are ones that we'd like them to include because it's relatively important. And these other ones are just would-be nices because we'd like to see it as a background cameo of someone with a non-speaking role holding the war banner for like House Darry in a war council. Something like that. That's would-be nice. And what do you think of the change to the Velaryon Seahorse sigil? They need to give at least an explanation of why they did that. And it's not just a binary thing of, well, I like it or I hate it, change it, but the middle ground of, shouldn't they at least give us an explanation? A real explanation beyond, well, because we felt like it. That's what Benioff and Weiss did. They would actually respond to questions with, well, creatively it made sense to us because we wanted it to happen. Why did you change this other character? Their actual response would be, because we made a decision to change it. This isn't how you treat the fan base. This alienates the fan base, and they're treading on thin ice. They thought they were invincible and they could get away with everything. Season 8 was that bad that even people who are willing to overlook seasons 5 through 7's flaws have really turned on them, and they're blind if they don't see how much of a pop culture meme it's become that season 8 was not paying attention to what the fans thought. That, oh, we can change stuff without any explanation because we felt like it, we have no oversight. That's what we are experiencing for every change, big or small, for the past decade. So shouldn't these new executives and this new writing staff, start out on the right foot by being more open and honest with the fan base? What we're asking for is honesty and basic dignity.